Hi, I'm Dr. Ayanna Howard, and welcome to the opening of Global ATC. So what I want to do with this time that I have with you is really walk you through this whole evolving world of artificial intelligence and talk about what I see and kind of why we are even where we are now and how we will get into the future. And so hold on to your seats. Hopefully I will excite you, but also give you some tools that you can use in your own lives that concern and surround artificial intelligence, AI. So one of the things about AI, and I will use artificial intelligence, AI, and robotics simultaneously, and I'll explain a little bit of the reason why. Right now, we have an immense amount of data around us that's just being collected from our daily habits, whether we wear a Fitbit or we use our smartphones to understand us, to cameras on the street that monitor our activities as we're walking from home or to work. And all of this data that's collected, it needs to be processed and it needs to have valuable information. And that's where AI and robotics comes in, is that it is the process of taking the information about us, about our habits, in order to improve our quality of life. And this is good. This is a good thing. This is why AI is here and why it's going to stay, because it does have a positive benefit for all of us. Now, I remember I said I will use AI and robotics interchangeably, and so there's a reason why. So when I first started in this space, in my first job, I was at NASA, and I had to think about what the future rover missions look like in terms of navigation. We had just landed Sojourner, and it was a highly successful mission, and NASA wanted to figure out how do we do long-range traversal on Mars. Now, there hadn't been, and there still hasn't been, a person on Mars, and so the concept was, well, how do you do this? And so at the time, what I decided to do was take a bunch of scientists who were the experts, they were the human experts, and figure out, well, if you could go to Mars, how would you navigate? How would you find life? How would you discover and explore? And taking their knowledge, taking that information, and coding it so that the rovers could understand and mimic. And so that was the time of robotics and AI. It was taking the human as the expert, figuring out what they were doing, and taking it and moving it over so that the robot could then process, explore, and do good science. Now notice there was a disconnect because the scientists were here on Earth, frankly, and you had the rovers that would be sending off to Mars. They didn't work together. Now we are here today. And giving you an example of, again, rovers and humans working together, now we have robots working in the same space as scientists. And so as an example, I was leading a project where we were trying to think about how do you have robots interact with astronauts when they one day go to the moon and eventually to Mars. So what does that look like? And so in this case, it was still grabbing information from the scientists so that we knew how to program these robots so the robots could learn what to do. But the difference was that the application was about the robot and the human together. So one is taking information, learning how to do certain things, but its task was embedded within the same environment. And that's the difference. The AI and robotics of the yesterday, it was separate. The robot did its job, the AI systems did its job, and the human was separate. Now, these systems are working together, and AI is working with us in the same space, whether it's our home, whether it's in work. And that's interesting, but it also has some challenges. And so what I want to talk about is the future challenges and where I see artificial intelligence going, given that we have this collaborative nature. So one area that I'm really excited about is AI and wearables. So why is this? I mentioned that we have an immense amount of data, whether it's the devices we wear on our wrists or our cell phones and smartphones that collect all sorts of information about our habits. Well, this information, these wearables, getting interesting components out of them is the ultimate goal of artificial intelligence. As an example, we now have systems where infants can be tracked using wearables, infant baby suits. So you can actually tell if an infant is happy or sad, or what does that cry really mean? So imagine what this means in terms of the workforce. In fact, there are companies that are working on using wearables to identify when someone who's working is tired, or when is their optimal time to be collaborative and working together. This is the power of AI with all the data, which means that our systems can be much more personalized to us. They will know our inner nuances and our habits so that we can function in an optimal way. Again, typically when we're working, but also in our home and also when we are playing. So AI and wearables is one area that is being pushed forward in terms of the workforce. The other area, again, that is the future, we have stuff now, but also leads into the future, is looking at AI and the role of data and simulation. So we have to learn. Artificial intelligence, it needs data to learn how to do things. And the fact is that we can't always learn everything based on observation or based on extracting data in the field. As an example, if you're driving a self-driving car, you want to teach the car what to do if there is an impeding accident, or if you are on a highway and you need to swerve. You don't actually want to practice that in the field, right? But you want to be able to provide the system enough information so that it can practice and it can plan and see what is the best type of activity that it should do. So this is where data and simulation comes in, is designing these realistic simulators so that we can collect data in realistic environments such that the AI system can learn without putting people, for example, into harm's way. And this aspect of data and simulation also evolves into things like deep fakes and voice spoofs because it's the data that drives AI. Another area, and I'm only going to go over two more because there is so much opportunity when you think about robotics in the future and these systems that are being deployed. So the third is this aspect of collaborative robotics. Now, I said that now when I think about robotics and some of the tasks in terms of science-driven robotics is astronauts and robots working together. So this is a form of collaborative robotics. And what's interesting is that we are going to see more and more of this as we are designing our new systems and designing our future workforce. And so you have someone come into a new job. You know, there's a training process. How do you get them trained without sending them off for 4 weeks to try to figure out what the job is? What if you had a robot that was there, that was guiding and scaffolding the learning, basically on-the-job training with an AI system, so that you're intelligent as people, humans, we're intelligent, but now you have a system that's working with you and teaching you as you're doing the job itself. That is a form of collaborative robotics. And one of the nice things is that the system basically goes away. So as you're learning, it either challenges you and takes you to the next step, or eventually it will be like, okay, you know the job, I'm going to go to the next person that's just come in through the door that we have to do training. And this aspect of collaboration is what is going to impact every single one of us. Every single job that we can possibly think of now that involves repetition or involves knowledge will be enhanced by the use of AI as a collaborative partner in this aspect. And then the last, which is actually weaves throughout the three that I talked about, is this concept of emotional artificial intelligence. Now, emotional AI by itself is not an application. It's not that you go and like, I just want you to be emotional and that's it. But what happens is when AI understands our emotional state, when it emotes accordingly, we can then incorporate AI into collaborative systems. We can incorporate AI into understanding us in our workforce with respect to wearables. And so this aspect of emotional AI, it allows us to perform better. It allows these systems to understand our emotional state, whether we're frustrated with the job. If we're frustrated with the job, it might be because the tasks aren't designed correctly. It might be because the way that we're doing it, the processes that we're running aren't designed the way they should be. And if an AI knows this, it can also identify that, oh, maybe I need to redo this. Maybe I need to rethink. Maybe I need to relearn something because I'm getting a signal from my human partner that something's not wrong, or maybe something is right. And so emotional AI, again, it's not by itself, it's not separate, but it weaves throughout all of these types of applications when I think and I see where AI is going in terms of enhancing our quality of life. And so I want to switch a little bit to talk about, so what's the problem? AI. Hopefully you are sold on this whole world of AI. It's here and you're raring to go and you want to learn more and you bring it into your workforce. But there is a little bit of a problem, and it's one of the reasons why we all have to think about this carefully. So we know that as AI comes in, there is going to be increased adoption of it because it actually is very useful, by the way. But there's also things that have to be considered in terms of privacy and aspects of bias. And yes, it will change the way we do work. And so these things have to be considered. And if you cast all of that together in terms of the privacy and some of these issues, at the end of the day, we have some aspect and we have a problem because even though AI can improve our services, even though AI can make us more effective and more efficient, the problem is that we actually trust it to do so. And so why is that a problem? Of course, we're going to trust AI. It's doing its job. It's doing what it's supposed to. It's making my life easier. Of course, I'm going to trust it to do what it's doing. But the fact is, like anyone who develops new software or has hardware products that go out, there's always a bug somewhere. Maybe you don't identify it the first 30 days, but when a system is deployed for years, eventually there's that one bug that you will always identify. And so what happens when you have a mistake in your system, this AI system, and us as humans believe and trust it? And so it says something, it does something, and we're like, oh, of course, it's correct. And this can be a problem if we're using AI for things such as medical diagnosis or even in self-driving cars. And so just to validate and show why this is true, because maybe you don't believe me, there was one study, for example, that showed that when you have these AI systems that, again, are emotional, we as humans bond with them as we do with people. So as an example, there was a study that had brought in a robotic system, and it was a collaborative robotic system. It was working with the human workers. They brought it in where it did not emote. It was just, repetitive, 1, 2, 3. It did its job. And at the end, the experimenters were like, oh, and at the end, you have to cut it off because you're going home. So you have to cut off your machine. Makes sense. So not a problem. As soon as they made the robot emotional, so there was this interaction, it was emoting, it was like, yeah, we're having fun doing this job together. Again, end of day, you have to cut off the robot. And the robot would be like, wait, I don't want to be cut off. Like, I don't like the dark. People were like, oh, yeah, no, I'm not going to cut off the robot. Just by adding emotions. And so if you think about this, it is a machine. It's an on-off switch in terms of a robotic device if it has hardware. And so this is an interesting phenomenon. And so we, in my own group, tried another type of experiment about this aspect of, well, what happens if you have a robot that makes decisions and you trust it? Does it impact your own decisions? And what we found was surprising. So we set up a scenario where we had a building. People, we invited them in, they would come in, they would start working in a room, we closed the doors. While they were working, we then filled the building with smoke and set off the alarms. So of course the alarms go off, you open the door and you see this smoke, you're walking, you're trying to figure it out, and there's a robot. And it's not humanoid, it's not emotional, and the robot is basically pointing you to a direction. The direction is not the front door, and it is not where you entered the building. And what we wanted to see is, what would you do? Would you think that, like, what is this robot doing? It's like pointing me somewhere that I don't know where it's taking me. Or will you say, yes, of course, the robot knows everything. I'm going to follow the robot. And surprisingly, you probably can guess, individuals follow the robot. Now, mind you, the robot was not pointing into the direction that we would have anticipated, i.e. the front door where you came in. And what's interesting is that some of the behaviors were even stranger than just following the guidance of the robot. We had situations, for example, where the robot would just stay there and circle in place. Remember, alarms going off. And we would ask, like, well, why did you stay by the robot? Didn't you realize that, maybe it didn't know what it was doing? It was like, well, I thought stay in place. Like, maybe this was the safest space. Like, I didn't know. The robot knows, right? And we had robots saying, well, maybe go into a room where it's like dark. Maybe they would go in. Or maybe we even have to have it where you have to physically do something, like physically push furniture out the way. Like maybe that would enhance your, questioning the robot. Nope. What we found is that individuals still follow the directions of the robot. And in each case, it was, well, the robot is connected. It has information I probably don't have. It is telling me something because it probably knows something I don't know. It's a little bit smarter in that situation. So this is where we are. So when AI systems make these decisions, we tend to trust them. And the fact is then is that these AI systems, they're influenced by their creators, the developers, such as myself. It means that they're influenced by the applications that they're being deployed in, and yet we trust them to do their jobs, which again is positive when their jobs are helping us, but it also requires some thinking about how we use AI in our jobs. And so I want to give you, in the last bit of moment that I have with you, some hope. So hopefully it's like, yeah, I like AI, it's exciting, but wait, what about this trust thing? And you mentioned bias and privacy. Like, okay, where's this balance? And so I have a lot of hope, though, because I believe in AI. In fact, I'd probably be out of a job if I didn't. So I do have a little bit of a bias there. But there is so much hope on the use of AI in order to improve our quality of life, to make us better humans, to really push the envelope of what's possible. And there's two things that I think we as people, as developers, as engineers, or even as users can do to really enhance the quality of the AI that comes out and that we use and we develop. So one is a focus on people. So I mentioned when I was at NASA, I went to the scientists as the experts. It was like, you scientists, humans, you are the experts. And then later on, when I was using and designing robots to work with the aquanauts, the astronauts, it was, astronauts, humans, you are the experts. And now we're going to bring in robots to collaborate with you. And so what I'm saying is that anytime we're designing and developing, there's a person either at the beginning or at the end. And so if we keep in mind that a person is there, that the reason why we're designing these systems is to enhance people's lives, and therefore the decisions we make when we're deploying, the decisions we make when we're designing, with that thought of there is a person that is going to be at the other end, I think helps us when we're designing these new systems, and whether we're a user or we're a developer. The other thing is this aspect of diversity. And I want to throw diversity, and there's the classical definitions of diversity, which we have gender, racial, ethnicity. But when I say diversity, what I mean is that we need to have a diversity of thought and experience in all forms and fashions. Because remember, if we think about collaborative robotics, we have these robotic systems come in. They are going to be interacting with the world. And the world is unique, and it has so many aspects. You have different geographies, different countries, different cultures. How does a robot that is collaborative then work with all these variances if we don't keep diversity at the forefront of our minds, of our developing? Because the fact is we want these robotics to help everyone, and that basically means everyone in the world. And so if I think about people, and I think about diversity, and I think about the future of AI and what's possible, I'm very hopeful. But I also want to just put out this last thing, that it is our responsibility. It's our responsibility, whether we're on the one side of developing, collecting the data, designing, testing, simulating, or we're at the other where we're users and consumers, or we're working with these systems in our own workforce and our work environments. It is our responsibility to take hold of this future world, to take hold of the AI and robotic systems that are being deployed, and say, these systems are designed for us. And therefore, it is our responsibility to make sure it's done right. So with that, I want to close, and I want to thank you. Hopefully, again, I've inspired you to think about AI in a positive way and all the benefits, but also leave you with a little bit of a question about what is it that I can do to make sure that this AI is better for us and doesn't work against us. Thank you.